World Economic Forum meetings, they continue in the Swiss town of Davos. Topping the agenda at that annual meeting of the business and political leadership is the war in Ukraine, climate change, and indeed COVID-19. Now, today marks day 4 of the summit, and this year's theme is working together to restore trust. And that's where we find our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, who is in Davos. Xolani, good morning to you. First time I see you dispensing with the trench coat. I take it that you've taken all of the cold that you can withstand. That aside, give us the highlights of that World Economic Forum thus far. What have been the key topics, perhaps just as we've outlined?
Good morning from a very, very warm Davos on the last day here in Switzerland. And of course, you mentioned climate change, you mentioned food security, the global economic outlook have been topical, but weighing heavily on delegates and world leaders here has been the situation in Ukraine. And it feels from the delegates here that the world does not know how to respond to the situation in Ukraine. That's why we heard yesterday from the foreign minister of Ukraine, and that is Dmytro Kuleba, who told the delegation that the negotiations with Russia are not going anywhere. And he actually emphasized the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky's address at the opening of this the Congress, that the world needs to help the Ukrainians with everything when it comes to the weapons, humanitarian relief, and medicines that are needed in those corridors. What has also taken place is that we have heard from Vitaly Klitschko, the former heavyweight champion, who is Ukrainian, and also the mayor of Kyiv in Ukraine, saying that that particular capital should be defended by the entire world. It has been quite a topical issue here, and it remains so when it comes to the deliberations that we're going to see later today. But when we look at the highlights from yesterday, it was a session between Bill Gates, the co-chair of the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a meeting that he had with the presidents of Malawi and Uganda, where they committed to actually help the lower 45 income countries in the world to close the gap for medicines that are quite needed, and most of those countries are on the African continent. So as the day 4 wraps up, it is really a notably somber Davos, with many delegates making their way home, but still have a lot to look forward to for the rest of this day.
Yeah, and as the day wraps up there, Xolani, any key note speakers perhaps that we might look forward to, or is that it now? It's simply about dismantling all of the structures that have been assembled there, at least temporarily.
Of course, they will start immediately as tonight to dismantle all of the structures that have been put up. What is quite interesting is that all the major conglomerates in the world actually go and book and rent spaces, the entire shops, mom and pop shops, pie shops, supermarkets, and they turn them into this Davos world for at least a week. And it's something that is quite interesting to watch, according to those who have seen it. So that is going to start happening later tonight. But before then, Davos delegates are going to hear from at least the first G7 leader to address Davos since it started. And that is Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, who was with President Cyril Ramaphosa just a few days ago. I think it was on Tuesday, where he was in South Africa for bilateral relations between South Africa and Germany. And that particular address is quite anticipated because it comes from the first G7 leader to actually address this particular Davos here in the World Economic Forum. And we are waiting to hear from him about such things as what the world and those who are immediate neighbors of Ukraine are going to do and are doing in order to help that particular country. And other discussions that are quite topical include what the world is going to do when it comes to warnings that have been made about inflation and the high cost of living, not only in South Africa, but in the entire world, with those warnings saying that inflation is going to rise for the next 2 years. What we are seeing now is just the beginning. And when you look at South African picture, you are looking at the inflation rate being at still at that 6% range, and for the first time we are seeing the US being at 8%. So our inflation is still lower than the US, but there are still concerns about it rising. There is another chart also that we are looking out for, and that has to look at the jobs outlook for the next year, and in particular how the jobs that have been lost due to the COVID-19 pandemic in the past 2 years will actually be saved or recouped. And one of the things that we've heard here in Davos is that there has been a commitment from world leaders to reskill at least 1 billion people and ensure that they find other means to actually gain an income.
Very interesting schedule indeed there on the last day of the Davos World Economic Forum. Xolani Mbanjwa, a very important element he makes there about the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, who made the point of, I suppose, visiting the continent of Africa first before going to Davos on the last day of the World Economic Forum there, I suppose underscoring the importance of these world leaders coming to African shores and perhaps to try and garner support for the war in Ukraine to come to an end, among other key topics of discussion, as you've heard from Xolani Mbanjwa there. Very important indeed. So